Hello, everybody, and we're live. This is Mahdeen, Philo, and Kylie. So we are going to be continuing our review today of the Islam versus atheism debate with Hamza Tzortzis and Mohammed Hijab versus two atheists. This was done a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, I think now, if I recall, and we are still in the process of finishing it. We're only halfway through it, and today we're going to be doing Hamza Tzortzis' opening statement. Well, if anybody wants to listen to our previous streams, you should find it in the live stream banner, I think. Is that right, Philo? And under that, you'll be able to find all our previous streams on that. So I encourage you to watch those if you're starting today only. But otherwise, today we should be covering Hamza's opening statement. I'm sure he's going to give a very strong performance, or maybe not. Let's see. And we will be critically analyzing it in a fair way, in an objective way, as far as possible. Of course, we don't side with him, but you never know. We have been neutral when analyzing Mark Openey's statement, which is the atheist in the grey suit, and even Aaron Fazer, who is the atheist in the black suit, and we've not found a lot of flaws with at least Aaron Fazer. At least I liked him a lot. I like his.
Same here.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Hello, and yes, whatever Madin said so far, I agree with him. Go ahead, Madin.
Mark's delivery wasn't as strong as Aaron's, but he was clear and concise, and as well, and he gave some good arguments and so on. But I think he could have done a little bit better when it comes to defending the moral claims a bit more strongly. Perhaps I just thought Aaron was more stronger in the sense that he laid down his reasons more precisely, whereas Mark was a little bit more softer and he didn't go into much detail. So if you guys want to know why I thought Mark was a bit like that, we thought that, well, you can go in our last stream that we did, live stream, and you can hear it all there as to what we thought. But otherwise, I thought both of them we agree with. At least I agree with both of them. It's just a different way of expressing the arguments for Mark, which I would have preferred. But otherwise, other than that, sorry, I agree with everything Mark is pretty much saying. So Philo, do you want to start playing the video, and then we can analyze what's going on?
Yeah, Madin, before we start the video, if you haven't already said, I just want to say to everybody who's going to listen to it is to subscribe, share it, and, press the, notification bell of the video. If you want to keep hearing us, because we would love to have some audience at least listening to us live, basically, at least so that we know that what we are presenting or the kind of arguments or the reviews we are bringing at least is helping the community in some way, at least, right? So that's going to be kind of a motivation for us to at least do all these kind of stream. So if you're listening, please do subscribe, share, and comment if you can. So without any further ado, we're gonna start the video.
May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon every single one of you. So before I get into my argument for God's existence that undermines naturalism, which goes...
Just wanted to ask, can you all hear the audio well enough?
Yes, I can.
All right, Callie, you can as well, right?
Yep, I can hear you.
Against the idea that naturalism explains reality. And by the way, naturalism cannot explain the hard problem of consciousness, the acquisition of language, objective moral values, and there's a whole list of recalcitrant facts against the naturalistic paradigm. To say that it explains the whole of reality is quite bizarre. But notwithstanding, I'd like to just make a few points. We're going to address every single one of your assertions. But the first point I'd like to say is, with regards to the problem of evil argument, it's a totally false argument. It misrepresents Islamic theism because it assumes that evil has some kind of ontological reality. Evil is real from the perspective of that it exists in our world, but ontologically it's based on the goodness and wisdom of the divine, which undermines some key premises of the argument. Also, from the perspective of suffering, under a naturalistic account, well, what is suffering? It's just electrons whizzing around, cold, blind, non-conscious, non-intentional electrons whizzing around. So from a naturalistic paradigm, just like what Richard Dawkins says, and I have respect for him on this particular matter because he's consistent. In his book, he says it's pitless indifference. No good, no evil. Also, you've strawed man my argument concerning the twofold dilemma. I didn't say God is only good. I said God is good, but the way we argue that because he's the only deity worthy of worship, and the only deity worthy of worship is the highest form of good, which we could unpack.
Madin, you were saying something, I think.
No, well, I just unmuted my
All right. I have a question here. I have a question for you guys, and I want to understand. This is a very honest question. What is this? I'm just trying to understand this phrase that he said, right? That evil ontologically exists as goodness and wisdom of the divine, right? So what does this mean, basically? And to me, it sounds, at least from my understanding, it sounds to me that this is a cop-out kind of, and maybe you can explain it to me better what he means by that.
Can you just replay that part?
Sure.
No evil. Also, book he says it's this particular sovereignness. What is suffering? This is an argument and wisdom of the of that it exists in our world. Reality, evil is real from the perspective of that it exists in our world, but ontologically it's based on the goodness and wisdom of the divine, which undermines.
You heard that?
Yeah. So let me just say a few things very quickly that this could mean. Right, it could very well mean that evil is real from our perspective, but from the perspective of God, it's not really evil. Right. So with more information, more data, we would know that what it looks like suffering can eventually be explained away when in reality it led to a greater good, maybe, and therefore it was within the framework of divine justice. It was overall a good act and therefore not evil at all. This is what I think Hamza Tzortzis is trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I see that that's what he's trying to say as well. But isn't there then a contradiction? At least from our perspective, we can say that it is evil. We perceive it as evil, but then you can't really question any kind of an act that we perceive as evil. Basically, let's say Hafsa is a 5-year-old girl, and she got brutally raped, tortured, and murdered. Yeah. Are we in a way? Can we then say, somebody can then say that this is the divine goodness and wisdom?
Yeah, exactly. So the problem with what Hamza is saying is that there's a difference between what might be the case, or what possibly is the case, or what within a divine justice framework what might be the case, and what we can see from our perspective, and not knowing that is true. So it might be the case that there's a greater good, but we don't know that is the case, right? All we have is a series of claims in the Quran. All we have is a series of claims that the divine being saying that he's good, yeah. And then we have a problem, the problem of suffering, and or evil, or whatever you want to call it. Now that's not reconcilable with a potential God, right? Even with those characteristics, it's not. Now here's the issue: if apparently the God. And this is what Hamza would say, we have the pixel and God has the full picture. So reality is that Hafsa being raped was for actually a greater good. It was actually justice in the end. It was some sort of merciful act, and we just don't know about it. But that's the thing. We don't know that's the case. That's one interpretation of what might be the case, but there's no evidence supporting that. It's like the following. Imagine we arrest somebody on the street for murder. Yeah, all the evidence suggests. Let's be more clear. Let's say it is Jeffrey Dahmer who raped, sadistically tortured, murdered, cannibalized men by picking it in America. He was a psychopath and so on. Now this does not look like a good act, right? He caused suffering and so on, and he gets convicted and he's going to jail, and he appeals the decision based on the idea that we just don't know the real reason why he did those things is actually for a greater good. Well, we don't see that. We're not in that position right now, right? We are not in the position to know that apparently why this excuse or defense that Jeffrey Dahmer has that apparently would enlighten all us folks to realize that in fact he was innocent. He did a good act or something like that. We're not in that position. So that is the problem with evil. And what's Hamza outlining is a potential possible logical explanation that is not that doesn't doesn't fit in with something called the evidential problem of evil. The evidential problem of evil shows, based on the evidence that we have right now, we have no reason to think God is just, right? Based on the evidence right now, there is no reasonable excuse, just like Jeffrey Dahmer. You see what I'm saying?
Right, I agree. And one more thing that this contradicts, this statement, and at least in my eyes, and you guys might be able to clarify it a little bit better, is that this statement, in a sense, contradicts with the goodness nature of the God argument, that the defense that Hamza throws in for the Euthyphro's dilemma. Now there is a contradiction here, right? You can say that God's nature is good, but what is good? It could be evil as well, right? I mean, what we perceive as evil, right? So when I say that to somebody that God's nature could be torturing, murdering, of a rapist, and whatever negative things we conceive of, he could as well be that. And in that sense, that the God's nature becomes arbitrary in a sense, pretty much, right?
Yeah. Well, there's different types of issues here. It could very well be, ontologically speaking, that God's nature is a morally benevolent being, and they get around the Euthyphro dilemma by saying that his nature is configured towards benevolence. That would still mean that the standard of morality is external. It's just that God is a character who has that sort of personality, right? In the same sense that if Philo, you had that personality, you are benevolent. Well, it's not just you don't make benevolence good. Benevolence makes you good, right? And you just behave that way. And everything, then if you're a benevolent person all the time, then if you tell me to do things, then I might listen to you more because I know that I trust you to be a benevolent person. It's the same thing with God. But the problem is, the Euthyphro dilemma can be divided into two parts. The ontological part, which is everything that I've discussed now. Can God ontologically be good? Well, he can never be the basis of good, as we know from all the Euthyphro conversations that we've had. That there is indeed, it will always be either arbitrary or external to him. But then there's a second, so that can't be had. If God is going to be, the closest it gets is by God being benevolent. But again, that's because benevolence makes him good, not him making benevolence good. So that's the first part, that's the ontological part. But then there's the epistemological part, which is, how do we know God is benevolent? Theists simply say this, right? So there's two parts to it. There's a logical part, whether it's possible that he can be, which we both said no, he can't. And the second part, which is the evidentiary part, where is the evidence that he's benevolent versus capricious, malicious? Yeah, and this is what Hamza says, that God apparently in the book says he's the master of justice. But how does the theist verify and substantiate, especially without his own moral standards? Because he just submissively adheres to God's morals. So how does he distinguish between a psychopathic God who only claims to be good, but really is a psychopath, versus a benevolent God, right? And he doesn't know that, and that's exactly what you're saying, right? When Hafsa is being raped, how do we know that it really is a just model versus an evil model? And this opens up the conversation about evil God and evil God hypothesis and so on. And the quick final thing that I would say is there's also another issue in the sense that even if we logically thought it might be done for a greater good, you can logically attack the potential of that. So even though the evidence doesn't support Hafsa's situation, that indeed God has only inflicted that suffering for a greater good, well, we don't see that greater good. Since we don't see that greater good, God is merely making a claim, just like Jeffrey Dahmer making a claim that he's actually killed people just for a greater good. Well, the court didn't think that. Court was like, okay, when you get the evidence, then we'll release you. And similarly, God still needs to produce evidence that Hafsa's suffering is for a greater good. But even if there was that evidence, right? The question is, couldn't God have arranged the state of affairs in such a way so as not to go through those disastrous, horrific events in order to achieve that good? Why is God committed to acting like a limited being, right? So why should God, in order to, for example, create happiness, have to act like a utilitarian and then kill lots of people or cause people suffering and then generate the happiness? Why can't he just skip that? Yeah, and get to it anyway. And so Hamza has to explain why God is stuck in this sort of mechanics Yeah. So, and yeah, I've got a few more things to say, but I'll let you guys talk.
Right. I know. I agree with all the points that you made over there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Kelly, you have anything?
Yeah. So, one point that I'd like to, mention is, you did cover it slightly, but just to maybe further expand on it. You see, Hamza just said that ontologically evil doesn't exist. Um, what wouldn't that imply that anything that we do in this world, any act, no matter how horrendous it might seem to us, ontologically speaking, it is not evil, which means that, and if you look into it, ontologically, our existence, the according to particularly atheistic perspective, our ontological reality is what really matters, right? It doesn't matter, uh, since this world is temporary, it's just a test. It doesn't matter essentially what happens over here, rather what's ontologically real, right? So wouldn't it be the case that anything that we do in this world, no matter how evil it is, it isn't evil ontologically, and therefore we can say that whatever even Hitler did wasn't ontologically evil. Then why is there a suffering? Why is there punishment for that in the hereafter if there is no ontologically
Exactly.
evil act?
Can I just quickly answer some of that? I think
Sure,
Hamza's
sure.
wrong here. He's just wrong what he's talking about. He's not theologically sound. I think that's incoherent or inconsistent with Islamic theology. Don't you think? Because there is the hacks. Otherwise, if evil didn't exist, then it wouldn't make sense to say why people should be punished in the hellfire, right? Anybody
Right.
who's suffering in the future in the hellfire would be because they did some crime or sin against God. So I'm not
Exactly
sure
my point. Yeah.
So I think he's just theologically wrong.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as far as
Madan?
the Euthyphro's dilemma is concerned, I think that you've covered it quite well. The question, as you said, is how Hamza is trying to deal with it again through claiming that, again, it's not clear. Number one, when he says that, I think he said a statement. He mentioned that um, God is the only deity worthy of worship, and He's the highest form of good, and therefore, so I'm not. It was quite circular the way he was putting his argument. He's the only deity worthy of worship. Why is that the case? Is that the case because he's good? What do you mean by good? Is he good? Again, we'll come back to the original question. Is he good because of what he does? Is essentially good, meaning we know through an external standard that being, uh, what's the word? Merciful and being kind is good, essentially good. Therefore, since God is that way, therefore he is good, and therefore he is worthy of worship. If that is the case, then what is there? There's an external standard that God actually abides by.
It is question begging, by the way. Yes,
Exactly. And if that is not the case, then whatever God, if your point is that whatever God does is good by definition, then again we come back to the arbitrary question that whether then the entire morality of
Arbitrariness
God
problem, right?
becomes arbitrary. Yeah.
Yes. All right, I'll just read the comment by Cosmic. Madin, you finish your whatever you were eating. Well, I'll read the.
I'm finished. Don't worry about that.
All right. So if you wanna go for it, then go for it. Yeah.
Sorry, what do you want me to do?
No, I was reading Cosmic. Seeing
sorry,
Cosmic after a long time, right?
Hopefully, I'll be able to join you guys for streams after next week. We'll finally get some space in schedule for this sort of intellectual discourse. Okay. But yeah, tune in for 10 minutes chunks whenever you guys are up. Yeah, absolutely, Cosmic. You've been a long time, beloved fan of ours. So of the few. So a long-lasting person like yourself should I would recommend always come on. You're always welcome. You're like a VIP right now, right?
Yeah. And I'll say one more thing to Cosmic is to just spread the word. Just make sure that you do so cautiously. Don't send it to your mom. Don't send it to your dad. Make sure that you send it to those, for sure that they're going to listen to us. All right.
Yeah, Cosmic. I mean, you must know more people who are like you, friends and colleagues, maybe, I don't know, people who are like you who would be interested in these sort of ways. People who are in your community, maybe in your friend network. So if you can get them, that would be great, because I'm sure there is people who are interested in this sort of discourse, and we've just not been very good at finding it yet. So if you can spread the word to those people, that would be great. Yeah. Anyway,
some key premises of that argument. Also, from the perspective of suffering under a naturalistic account, well, what is suffering? It's just electrons whizzing around, cold, blind, non-conscious, non-conscious.
You wanted to say something, or should I forward it? What did you say, Martin?
Hamza Tzortzis misrepresents Richard Dawkins there.
Right.
I'm sure that's not what, because Richard Dawkins does indeed believe in some sort of philosophical morality that you gain through reason, right? He's not necessarily a nihilist. So what he's trying to say is that the universe is indifferent and cold, maybe. That's different, right? I think that's what he's lifting from. He's not saying that there is no moral frame of reference that you can't have. He's saying that the universe is cold, and we agree with that, right? From the perspective of the universe isn't a conscious anthropomorphic being who can think and feel, and it's cold in that sense. And evolution is a cold a process, right? It's an impersonal, non-conscious, non-sentient, non-empathic process. It's merely a set of mechanics. That's what Dawkins means. He's talking about the universe, the cosmos, evolution, natural processes. And we agree with that. I agree with that as Mardin. I'm sure Kylie agrees, Philo agrees with that. But yet, when we're talking about morality, we're talking about something entirely different. We're talking about when conscious beings come into existence and start thinking rationally. Can we figure out a way to live, a way to do things that are good for us from a moral point of view? And I submit that you can, and many atheists submit that you can in some sense. That's all. So he's kind of, I don't know why he's misquoting, misusing Richard Dawkins. I would say that's academic silliness on his part. The other thing is, the second part thing is, he says that we're just a bunch of electrons or atoms whizzing around or something like that. That is so fundamentally wrong that I'm just getting tired of completely debunking these sort of arguments. The issue with that is that he's committing the fallacy of composition, or reverse composition, if you want to call it, right? The fact that, let me just give you an example. A cake is just a bunch of atoms. A pastry is a bunch of atoms. A sugar cane is a bunch of atoms. Therefore, they're all identical. Well, no. Yes, they are a bunch of atoms, but they arrange in particular chemical compositions and then become these macrostructures, right, that have differing qualities. A cake has a particular shape and arrangement and so on and so forth. When I don't think I need to go into the descriptions of what the difference is between a cake and a little pastry and a sugar cane. And similarly, if we take Hamza's word for it, then there's no difference between hydrogen and carbon. They're all just bits of atoms buzzing around. Well, no, there's differences between that. So he's making a problem of reverse composition, which is something I just made up. I don't think there is a. What he's trying to say is that because we consist of certain things, therefore we are just those things. Well, that's wrong. A house is made out of bricks. That doesn't mean a house is merely just a set of bricks. There's a difference between a set of bricks and a house. Exactly. A car is made out of certain atoms, certain components, metal parts. But a car is not.
Yeah, I was thinking, Mahadin, of a different example here. I was thinking of water, right? Water has one property, kind of like it flows, basically. You just throw it down, it flows. And humans are made up of like 60% to 70% of water. Why don't we humans flow, all of us, right? That's the kind of an argument that Hamza is trying to give. It's a fallacy of composition. You said it right. I mean, it's a reverse composition, basically, right? Pretty much.
It is something like that. Yeah, inverse composition or something like that. I think there is a word for that. There is a name for that fallacy. I forgot. But he's making a factual error there in the sense that that's all we are. We're not all that. We are also human organisms. We have brains. We're sentient beings. We're conscious beings. We have desires and preferences, which atoms don't have. There's a fundamental difference between a sodium atom and us, right?
He's completely dismissing the emergence of properties from within the fundamental particles or fundamental things, basically, you know.
Yeah.
So in his book, basically, he's thinking that there's no meaning to emergence. What you have to do is basically dig down to the very basic fundamental levels of anything, and that's about it. Any emergence from that is trivial, pretty much, right? And
exactly, but he ends up in his own crosshairs though by going down that route, because according to him, first of all, he has to deal with that issue as well. Just because he believes in theism doesn't mean he's no longer a bunch of atoms. He has to demonstrate the existence of the soul. He has to demonstrate the existence of immaterial realities. You know, he can't simply just take the theistic word for it unless unless there's good evidence supporting those things. So you can actually believe that the book is created by some sort of being, but then you need to demonstrate individual claims like there is a soul, and you can't do that unless you demonstrate there's a track record of the deity to get things right, truthfully, right? Otherwise, you do need some independent evidence. But he's got the same problem. He's also an organism, and he's made out of atoms and so on. But let's say he was a soul, but then what is he made out of? He's made out of an immaterial entity, and he's just some spooky entity. So just like human beings under materialism or naturalism are made out of atoms whizzing around, electrons, well, he's made out of little spiritual units or something that can be divided, thought of in that particular way. If he's a soul, then he's just a soul.
Yeah,
right?
he's just merely a soul. I mean, and what a trivial thing. What
then
good
he'll
is
say
it as a soul, pretty much?
Yeah, but then he'll say this soul has thoughts and feelings, but well, that's the same thing with on naturalism or materialism. This brain has feelings and thoughts. This nervous system has feelings and thoughts. It's not what the matter that matters. It's how that matter is configured that gives it that value. And that's what it fundamentally wants to say. He wants to say you can't have value in a naturalistic universe. I think that's what you can't reduce value to atoms and so on. Well, nobody's trying to reduce it to that. It's an emergent property, right? If anything, nobody's trying to reduce consciousness necessarily. There are theories of consciousness that reduces, but they're not trying to reduce it necessarily. You could say that it's an emergent property that emerges at a particular level, just like the wetness of water emerges at a particular level with the number of H2O molecules combining together. Individually, the wetness is not there, but in aggregate, together, collectively, it produces wetness. Similarly, consciousness might just be like that. But again, he's trying to say you can't have. How can you value, just like a rock? A human organism has no value because we're made out of the same properties. Well, we're different, and the difference is a rock doesn't have the ability to suffer, right? And human organisms do. And if some of the ethical arguments that we have been making and Mark and Co have been making are true, then there's a reason to value, for example, if we want to be a moral being, human organisms who have conscious thought versus rocks. Rocks can't think and suffer, whereas human organisms can. It's not the materials that make us up that determines that, but it's the way those materials are arranged that eventually leads to a particular type of experience capabilities that the human organism can have that the rocks can't. It's the same for the soul. If the soul just existed but couldn't suffer, it would also not have moral value, just like the rock. But because the soul exists and the soul contains desires and an ability to suffer, this is why it's within the moral point of view, or it becomes has moral status. In other words, the substrate of material that contains an agent that can suffer is irrelevant. It's whether you can suffer, right? If rocks could suffer, then that would be within our moral conversation. It'll have moral status. If souls couldn't suffer, then it would not be part of our moral conversation. Yeah. Anyway, I'm talking too much. So you guys want to, yeah.
I would like to, go a step, further back. And as you mentioned that this applies to his worldview as well. And I'd say that it applies to God as well. The point is, according to him, the nationalistic understanding of the world implies that we cannot assign any significance to our existence because we are just a bunch of atoms whizzing around. You already clarified that we are not focusing on that right now. What's important is that this bunch of atoms is conscious and has feelings, has subjective experience. It can suffer, it can feel pleasure. So the subjective experience and the consciousness is what's important. And we can further elaborate that and prove that by pointing out the fact that according to them, God is important only because he's conscious. I'll tell you why I say that. God is nothing except a multiverse generator who is conscious. Okay, so under the atheistic worldview, let's say, one could argue that we don't believe in a personal or a divine being who created this universe. Possibly a multiverse generator or whatever cause exists behind our universe, or whether the universe itself is the cause, is eternal. It is not conscious, or it may not be conscious. The theists emphasize, and their whole paradigm depends on this point, that no, the first cause is conscious. And then they also add a bunch of more attributes to that, but that is the primary attribute that is important for something, for a multiverse generator to be distinguished from a god. Do you think I'm right? So the question is, then, why is a multiverse generator, why is God more important than multiverse generator? Why is God significant but a multiverse generator isn't? It's because he's conscious. How otherwise do you think, why do Hamza think that according to his paradigm his existence is important? Because God says so, that his existence is important. Who is God to attach significance to something, and why is it important? Why is it the source of for us to know what's significant or not? How does God know that he himself is his own existence is significant? He just happens to be this conscious, mindless, timeless, spaceless being. Just like we are a bunch of atoms whizzing around, he just happens to be just a mindless, a mind which is spaceless, timeless, and eternal. He just happens to be that. Why is that important? What does that? How does that gives him significance, or how does that give him the power to assign significance to something? And then whatever he says is actually gives us, means that there is true significance to that. There is no reason to believe in that. He himself cannot prove that his own existence is significant. So the question would apply to God as well.
It does seem, exactly as you said, it does seem that conscious beings have more value, right? But like you said, why does God himself have that value unless the theist gives it that value to some extent, right? And he's probably giving it that value because God is a mind versus not a non-mind. I think that is somewhat something to do with it. In addition to that, I don't think that that's a sufficient condition, though. I think it might be a necessary condition for that value aspect.
I think it would be a kind of, it would be kind like another Euthyphros dilemma. I mean, it's a kind of Euthyphros dilemma, because either you say that something is important because it's conscious, and so you're assuming that whatever is conscious is significant, and if you're saying no, it's important because God says so, then why? What makes that significant? Something, how does that
they've actually
make it significant?
Philosophers have made an argument like that already. There is a problem of Euthyphro dilemma type situation for meaning. So it's the same. Imagine everything about morality applied in the context of meaning. Just like theists deny you can't have meaning and purpose in life without God. And in an atheistic universe, there's no ontological basis for meaning or purpose. Well, the Euthyphro dilemma here can be adopted and restructured, reframed explicitly for tackling this problem by saying, well, okay, if God is the ontological basis for meaning, well, is meaning really truly meaningful because it is actually truly meaningful, or is it because God said so? So is it then? Otherwise, it becomes arbitrary to God, right? But if it is truly meaningful, and then because of God's nature or something like that, then you have the same problem again, which is that it's an external standard of meaning, whatever that meaning is. What is that meaning-making property? Well, in this case, you might be kindly saying that it's consciousness, right? And or purpose or something like that, or value or something like that. What I'm trying to say, meaning. Well, I personally don't think meaning is exclusively related to consciousness per se, but you need consciousness for meaning because you need a conscious mind to appreciate meaningfulness. And my views on meaning is more to do with happiness and pleasure and fulfilling goals and so on. But if there's like an objective meaning, it might coincide with, let's say, a moral duty. And the only time you can have a moral duty to things, most probably, unless you believe in a kind of moral framework that values inanimate objects, is that if you have other conscious beings, and in that sense, there is a moral meaning where meaning and morality cross paths. That you have a duty to others, but the reason that you have a duty to others is because they're conscious beings who can suffer and feel, right? And in that sense, also you have a meaning from that. Just by performing your moral duties, you're also coincidentally performing your meaning-making activities, and yeah, there you go. And in that sense, if meaning and conscious, if having a meaningful life involves duties to other conscious beings, you need conscious beings and you need consciousness as part of it. This is why I think it's a necessary condition. It might be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient one, right? And in that sense, yeah, why would, in that theory, I would say, why would a theist, for example, value God unless he was conscious? Because if he was unconscious, he wouldn't have.
All right. I think I'll just bolster what Kayali said, right? And this problem that he suggested seems to be insurmountable, and the reason being our understanding of God and the attributes, all the things that we ascribe to God are in terms of attributes. So consciousness is kind of an attribute, but what defines God basically? Is there a fundamental property to God that defines, and consciousness is just an attribute? Then the problem that Kali was mentioning is a problem basically, because that's the same problem we have. And what is that fundamental thing? We're looking for that thing. But if consciousness is the fundamental problem or the fundamental thing, that kind of a thing, that Euthyphro's dilemma that Kali is talking about, again, we are stuck with the same thing basically. Is it just a consciousness, sheer consciousness? That seems like an arbitrary thing basically, right? But yeah, I mean, I agree to what that problem, right? Seems like an insurmountable problem. Shall we move on?
Yes.
Yeah, I think because we're at 38 minutes, we should move on.
Just non-intentional electrons whizzing
Are
around.
you playing it at 1.25?
So from a naturalistic paradigm, just like
Sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead, Kelly.
I was saying, are you playing it a bit faster?
No, I'm playing at the same normal rate.
1.25.
Right.
like what Richard Dawkins says, and I have respect for him on this particular matter because he's consistent.
I'm gonna move
so
forward.
You've strawed man my argument concerning Euthyphro's dilemma. I didn't say God is only good. I said God is good, but the way we argue that, because he's the only deity worthy of worship, and the only deity worthy of worship is the highest form of good, which we could unpack. But also we have another argument against Euthyphro's dilemma. It is a false dilemma because there is no external standard that Allah has to submit to. And although it is good because God commanded it, his commands are not arbitrary. They're not dislocated away from his nature. That's a false assumption. And also, when we look at the reality of God's commands, we see they cannot be arbitrary unless you want to believe that something could come from nothing or something well designed.
All right. I think here Hamza has evaded the whole Euthyphro's dilemma, right? Pretty much
I
he
think
tried to. Huh?
Let's just complete his statement. I think it's
Okay,
he hasn't
it's somewhere.
Is actually based on some kind of randomness. And let me explain. God's commands, manifested in Islamic moral and legal law, addresses the moral needs of human beings on a personal, social, and political level. We have over 1,000 years of a great society. Secularism has only existed for what, 90 years or 100 years, maybe more, and we've seen more bloodshed under secularism than any other moment, time, and phase in history. But notwithstanding, the commands of God are like a key that perfectly fit in a lock that opens the door to well-being and functioning for individuals and social harmony. A key is designed for a lock. And just like the key is designed for a lock, the commands of God are designed for our well-being. Therefore, it's completely irrational and absurd to claim that God's commands are arbitrary. To argue that they are arbitrary is equivalent of claiming that a specific key that opens a specific door was actually not designed for that function. So there's much more to say. So much things were going on. But let me start with what I call the Quranic argument of prior cognitive.
All right. All right, Kelly, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so Mahadin, do you want to go first?
You go first.
Okay, so I'm not. Okay. Okay, so I mean, I'm not sure how it's not clear to him that he still hasn't dealt with the dilemma. He just mentioned that God's morality or moral rules are not arbitrary because they are a kind of key to a certain lock, and that lock he suggested was human well-being. Well, the question is, why is that lock? Why was this specific lock chosen by God? That is the question. If you're saying human well-being is the standard, is the ultimate standard, why did God choose it? Did God choose it because it is good to choose human well-being, to select human well-being, or because he chose it arbitrarily and it is only good because God chose it? So then again, he has not dealt with the dilemma. He is just saying that it's not arbitrary because the moral rules are the key to the lock. What is that lock? Again, that lock is either arbitrary or an external standard. I'm not sure how this is not obvious to him.
Yeah. He doesn't understand it. And furthermore, he said a little things that just don't make a lot of sense that only he would say and nobody else has said in the philosophical literature. For example, he said it can't be arbitrary because something can't come from nothing. And that has nothing to do with sorry, I've got a message.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That where does that where did that come from? Sorry, carry on, Madin.
What were you talking about? My message, or are you talking about something from nothing?
No. Sorry, I was talking about where did that he jump from Euthyphros to that point, pretty much.
I've never seen any philosopher make that difference. This is a completely quintessential Hamza Tzortzis thing. He needs to write a paper, put it into publishing. So because something can't come from nothing, God can't be arbitrary. That would be revolutionary. Yeah, Hamza Tzortzis is sitting here pronouncing it, giving it away for free because I can plagiarize him and reproduce it in a journal. Why are you doing this, Hamza? You'll be famous and popular if it was such a strong objection. Because the reason nobody's thought about this is because it makes no sense, right? I'll challenge anybody who's listening to this to make it make sense, please, right? Because it doesn't make any sense. Because nobody's saying if God is an arbitrary being that is coming from nothing, right? Because God is not nothing, right? It just means that his characteristics, he makes things up at random, right? It'll be like it could be, for example, an indeterministic God, or it's just his whims and desires. That's what we mean by arbitrary. It's arbitrarily assigned the value judgment good to whatever he prefers. There's nothing, nobody's saying that this is coming from ex nihilo. He's conflated the word arbitrary with ex nihilo, but that's not the argument when somebody says arbitrary. Arbitrariness can exist in the form of just random commands, in random desires built in within God, in God's nature.
Madhan, what he may be trying to do, and let me put on a skull cap for a moment. What he's saying, if these commands are not coming from an external source, and in his mind, he thinks that the only source right now is God. And that's why they are not coming from anywhere outside, but they're coming from inside God, basically, right? So he hasn't answered anything pretty much, but he has just tried to provide a
That
food
seems like
salad pretty much. I mean, word salad, rather not food salad, word salad pretty much, right?
yeah, that seems like an overly charitable version of what he's saying. That he's are you saying that he's not? He just means that since there is a moral standard and since that can't be external to God and it
Right,
can't come out of nothing,
exactly. And
therefore it has
that's
to be
the
God.
answer lies as in, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, therefore it can't come from nothing. Therefore, it's come from God, and if it comes from God, God can't be arbitrary. Is that what you're
Right.
saying?
Right.
That's a
That's what I'm thinking he's thinking. That's I'm wearing my, skull cap right now, thinking through. Because otherwise that statement doesn't make any sense. Why did he put it over there pretty
Yeah, but
much?
given that these people don't always make sense anyway, sometimes I don't I don't put it past them that that's my original understanding isn't the right, is not the right one, and your one is the right one. That seems overly charitable. But even if we go with your charitable explanation, that let me just restate it so I can think about it whilst I talk about it. It's the idea that
Nothing can come ex nihilo,
nothing
nothing,
can come, yeah, ex nihilo, and there is a moral standard. Well, nobody has. He has to explain why, if there is a moral standard that is coming ex nihilo, right?
Right.
Nobody's saying that it's coming ex nihilo by any means, because the arguments he's basically skipped justifying it and explaining it. Morality isn't necessarily a thing that's popping out of a vacuum, right? It's not as though it's more like if it's like Platonism, let's say moral Platonism. Well, he can't make the argument that moral Platonism can't come out of a vacuum, and therefore it's false, because Platonism is such that it doesn't need to come out of a vacuum. It's a necessary truth, right? Now, I'm not saying any of that this is true. I'm just saying on the assumption that Platonism is true, right? Platonic ethical virtues are correct. The Platonic model of Platonic model of morality is correct, which is very similar, by the way, to God, divine command theory. Just the difference is that it's not seated in the God's nature. So I think the divine command theory has modified divine command theory, for example, has modified itself in such a way that it has embraced Platonism. Reason God is good is because of benevolence, because of mercy, because of justice. But that's the Platonic ideal as well. It's just the Platonic ideal is an atheistic one in which it's not seated within the nature of God. It's an external standard. But maybe this is what he wants to say, and I'm unpacking it for him right now. And you've assisted in that as well, especially. So the Platonic ideal of these ideals and compassion and so on, they exist, but they can't come out of nothing. Even there, I've never heard any philosopher, even like people like William Lane Craig, who attacks Platonism, make that argument, right? They've never made the argument that the reason Platonism can't be true, or Platonic ideals can't be true, or even the Platonic understanding of mathematics can't be true, is because it can't come out of nothing, because something can't come from nothing. I've never heard that. So it sounds very specious already that there are plenty of people working on this who have never thought of this kind of unique argument. It's precisely because things that can't pop out of ex nihilo are to do with material facts, natural facts, physical facts. Platonism is not a physical theory, and therefore has nothing to do with that. And furthermore, under like a modal understanding of logic, people would say the truth of, let's say, 1 + 1 = 2 is a necessary truth that exists in all possible worlds, not as a physical fact, but as like an abstract fact, right? That's it. Because it's an abstract fact that we recognize maybe through our conceptual reasoning and so on, like 1 + 1 = 2. When nobody's making the argument that 1 + 1 = 2 has to come out of some physical form or something. It's always existed. It's like an eternal truth that simply exists, right? That is not that much different from his own belief, where he thinks a mind just simply exists, an immaterial mind just simply exists. So at least when you compare those kind of theories, that he should at least be welcome to this sort of possibility.
Right. Mahaden, can I just are you done with your
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't want to stop you on your phone. Khayali, are you there? I see that one more Khayali has joined, so I'm not quite sure what's happening there. You there, Khayali? Can you hear me? So seems like Khayali dropped out, and then I'll have to. Yes. So we have now on the screen two Khayalis.
It's a duplicate.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. What happened? You're still there. One of you is there. You cloned yourself,
Yeah, you
right?
can.
You popped out of
Yeah,
ex nihilo. You popped out of nothing. And
yeah,
we all know from nothing, nothing comes, right?
yeah. No, I actually was changing my. I mean, I'm coming from a different system right now, so
Okay,
that's
okay.
why.
Shall I remove the earlier one?
Uh, okay, yeah. Just keep it. Just you can
Keep
remove
it
it
in the screen.
from the stream. Yeah, but don't push him outside of the stream though. Just
Okay, let me see this. Moving. I haven't never
I
tried
mean, push
this.
him on push the other ID to the backstage.
Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, backstage. Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, I can still hear you.
All right. Okay. All good. All good. You wanted to say something on this part that from nothing, nothing comes.
No, I think
Yes.
Mahaden has already expanded upon it quite
Right. Right.
in quite much detail. So I don't need to. I don't have any further points.
I am mindful of the time. That's the
Sure.
only thing. Yeah. Can I
Let's
just
move
quickly say
on.
one more thing about what Hamza said, though? Just one more thing, and then I'll have to take a break from the next one because we're going to end up going for 2 hours, and I don't want to do that. Yeah. One more thing about what Hamza said is that he's assuming there is there is a moral standard, and given that it can't be an external standard because an external standard can't come from nothing, and therefore it has to be seated in God, right? Right. But the thing is, the Euthyphro dilemma doesn't necessarily say that we don't need to conclude there is an external standard, right? It could be the case that an external standard can't exist, but let's say, okay, let me put it this way. Let's say the Euthyphro dilemma succeeds in demonstrating that it has to be an external standard. But then Hamza comes along and says what your charitable interpretation of it, which is that but an external standard just can't come out of nothing. And therefore, it has to be seated in God. And therefore, that's how he gets around it.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's what I thought he's thinking. And
Yeah.
can you, Martin? Yeah.
But that doesn't demonstrate that God is not arbitrary, right?
Right.
So
right.
because I interpret Euthyphro to have two different problems. In the one sense that if there is an ontological basis, can it be grounded in God? And Euthyphro says no, and there has to be an external standard. But according to Hamza's new little argument, because if there is an external standard, it has to come from nothing, and from nothing comes. There can't be an external standard. Okay, so now he pushes Euthyphro out of the way and then says, therefore, it has to be grounded in God. Yeah, only if there is a morality and that can be grounded on God. But he doesn't demonstrate the epistemological problem how does he know if God is arbitrary versus that his ontological nature grounds a true benevolent morality. He might be psychopathic and disguising himself, right?
Right. Right.
In this possibility, there is no morality. Atheists don't have morality. Theists don't have morality, or something like that, maybe. Yeah, or atheists can have morality, but theists don't have morality. Those are two possible worlds. In one world, where both theists and atheists don't have a moral standard. Yeah, Hamza wrongly believes that God is a moral standard when he's just an arbitrary, capricious being, or a psychopathic being. Or a second world where Hamza is all of those things, but atheists can also have a moral standard, right? Now he's saying the atheistic moral standard, let's say, can't come out on nothing or something. Maybe that's true, maybe that's, but that's irrelevant for him to demonstrate that his God is not an arbitrary God, right? Whether or not, basically, an external standard needs to come out from a nothing or something. And I think that's a false problem. But even let's say we acknowledge it and say, yes, it has to come from ex nihilo and that kind of, or something like that. That's a problem then. He still has the problem to show, but his God is not an arbitrary God. It could very well be that the atheist can't justify an external standard, and he can't demonstrate that God is actually non-arbitrary and benevolent, and therefore worthy of worship. How does he go about doing that?
So here's a problem, Mahadin. I'm posing a question to both of you, Khayali and Mahadin, and maybe this is a flawed question to ask. Pretty much, when we are saying that he's saying he's so hell-bent on saying that morality cannot come from nothing, pretty much, right? Because then you can't have an external standard for Euthyphro's dilemma to work, pretty much. What if that is a parallel reality? The morality, if you want to, you can assume that it has been existing since eternity, just like, or it is an eternal source, pretty much, just like God. Why can't that happen? Why can't those two exist, pretty much, separately?
Kylie, do you want to go?
I think what I'd say is that maybe it's the same thing, and let me put it in another way. Hamza has said that there can be no external standard because nothing can come out of nothing, and ex nihilo standard out of ex nihilo cannot be there. The question is, if you are basing it on, if you're saying that morality comes from God's nature, and God's nature is the standard, then where did God's nature come from? Are you saying God's nature is ex nihilo, came from ex nihilo? And if so, if you are agreeing that God's nature is the source of morality, and you say that God's nature is eternal, maybe similarly we can say that this external standard is also eternal. I'm not sure if this is what your point was.
Yeah, that's exactly I'm saying. If you God's nature has this property or attribute of being, being moral or being good, right? Why can't this goodness be an outside property that has eternal existence, pretty much, right?
I think he's trying to say that, though, if it's assuming he's right, assuming your interpretation of his is right, God's nature exists eternally as a thing, but an external standard doesn't exist as a thing, right? I think what he does, he's getting confused here. But if he's thinking of it like that, he seems to think God is more of a concrete object than an external standard of morality, and that doesn't make a lot of sense because God is not a concrete object. God is an immaterial mind.
Right.
So it's spaceless, timeless. It's got no physical properties at all. It doesn't weigh anything. But that could also be the same for the external standard of morality, like a Platonic standard. They're also spaceless, timeless, doesn't weigh anything. So if a mind is eternal, why can't an abstract object? Because ultimately a mind is also abstract, very abstract in the sense, very similar to an abstract object. It's an immaterial entity. And concepts like benevolence is good is also an immaterial thing. It's not a benevolence is good is not something that we can physically find, for example, if under the Platonic model. It's just something that we understand. Similar to mathematical statements, and yeah, you're right. I think there's no reason why those both can't exist eternally. And if God doesn't exist, then it can just exist eternally, just like God exists eternally.
Great. Shall we move ahead then?
Information. And today, my dear brothers and sisters and friends, I will argue that Islamic theism makes sense of our ability to produce thought and rational judgments. I would argue that the very fact that atheists are interlocutors can have a thought, can have a judgment, whether it's sound or not, and there's been very unsound reasoning going on today. But the point is, the very fact that you can have a thought and you can have a judgment.
Just wanted to remark that it's a jibe at Aaron and Mark, pretty much, right? Just wanted you guys to note that point.
Yeah, can you just play that part again, please? Because I changed the window for a moment. Yeah, I know it's just 60 seconds, I think. That you
can have a thought, can have a judgment. The very fact that sense of our ability to produce.
Can you hear that?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Thought and rational judgments. I would argue that the very fact that atheists are interlocutors can have a thought, can have a judgment, whether it's sound or not. And there's been very unsound reasoning going on today. But the point is, the very fact that you can have a thought and you can have a judgment requires God's existence in the first place. So it's quite interesting that atheists think about denying God, but that very cognitive process requires God in the first place. And now, if I have time, I'm going to talk about why God is worthy of worship. And this argument is from the Quran, and the best arguments are from the Quran. If you go to chapter 2, verses 30 to 33, Allah says, He taught Adam the names of things. Then He presented them to the angels and said, tell me the names of these if what you say is true. They replied, glory be to you. You have no knowledge except what you taught us. You are truly the all-knowing, the wise.
Yeah. No, unless you want to let the public hear that part, anybody who's watching, I don't think anybody's watching right now. But we've all heard probably stuff like that, and he's just reciting from the Quran now. So yeah, I saw that jibe against. The problem is these two guys, Hijab and Hamza Tzortzis, if they did have genuinely strong intellectual arguments, they wouldn't have to dance around wearing these grass skirts, playing all these monkey games, and would actually engage with the sophisticated arguments. And they're just not doing that, right? Like, first of all, they probably never heard of some of the more refined objections to Yusuf dilemma. And they simply do not engage with it. And according to Aaron Fezer, who's read through the book, he actually says that he talked about very many different authors who have objections to these things. They should at least have conscious realization that these arguments exist, and then rephrase and represent that atheistic case and explain it in detail. If you recall how I responded to an intelligent design commenter yesterday, I rephrased the arguments, right, to show that, look, I understand what you're saying. This is what you're saying, right? And this is why I think it's wrong, right? Hamza and Hijab don't even demonstrate that they are aware that these cases exist. Now, if your reasoning and judgment and strength of arguments are so strong and you're so confident, then why don't you do that? So, yeah, you should have no fear or fervor, but they do have the fear, right? So what this looks like is a false, disingenuous, disingenuous demonstration of intellect and even masculinity. When people fake being strong, when you get into a fight and you throw your chest out, but when you actually get into the fight, the person who's acting really loud ends up being really quiet. Hijab and Hamza Tzortzis seem to be like that. It's a lot of talk, but very, very, very little substance. And I want the audience to really be aware of that when you look into what they're saying, when their books, they don't even engage with a fraction of the academic counter objections, and yet they're purporting to be, to come to the right conclusions on all of these things. But if they're genuinely clever and smart and intellectual and brave and truth-seeking, they should have done this, but they haven't done this, which is evidence that this is just an act.
Right, they are the underdogs in an intellectual arena, and they have the upper hand in bullying arena, if I may say so.
Yes, I think that's what's happening. They have to resort to these tactics because they don't have the intellectual capabilities to do this. So that's why they're showering all of their speeches with all such strength and power and fervor. Why wouldn't the atheists do that?
One more possible reason, Mahadan, why they are resorting to these tactics is they persuaded a huge number of their followers to come over there, listen to these really seriously intellectual talks. Right now, what's happening? If you guys can see behind all of these guys, they have no clue as to what's happening here. Seriously. Maybe one or two guys might be understanding what kind of arguments are being, talked about. But I think most of these guys probably are not really, they're not even thinking through the arguments, probably. At least I noticed a couple of guys who were like, I could see a blank on their faces pretty much. So maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be proven wrong here. But so it's to engage that kind of audience, he had to resort to these. So as soon as he makes those jibes, there is like a chuckle in those,
I saw that. I saw that. I saw the chuckle as well. It's just so embarrassing and humiliating for the crowd that they don't realize it, that they are the laughing stock.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they are eventually the laughing stock, pretty much.
yeah,
Right?
the joke is on them, and they don't realize it. It's embarrassing. What I would say to Hijab and Hamza, if they're obviously they're probably not listening, but anybody who, if they're anybody, their fan club, their fanboys or fangirls or whatever you want to call it, if they're listening, if these guys are truly champions of this, yeah, why don't they genuinely engage and interact with the points specifically? That would demonstrate strength and courage and honor and intelligence, but they're not. So I challenge them to genuinely show me some proof that you can do this, because even I'm getting tired of it, because when I engage with people like this, they don't interact, right? They always want to play these kind of weird games, and I end up playing those games with them in the end. Very, very few times you get a real like theistic thinker, deep thinker, and they tend to be usually Christian. Yeah, and I don't know why that is, but so my challenge to Hijab and Hamza is, without theatrics, without insults, without euphemisms, can you make a solid, strong argument? Do you have the bravery and the courage to do so? Do you have the manhood to do so? Can your argument stand on its own legs? Or are you too much of a coward that you need to act like a little juvenile child? That's my challenge to them. Anyway. Hello, is anybody there?
Yes. Kelly, you have anything to add to the conversation?
No, I think you guys have already expanded on these points a lot. So let's go ahead.
All right, let's move forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Allah said, "O Adam, inform them of their names." Then when Adam did, Allah said, "Did I not tell you that I know the secrets of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you conceal?" And the exegetical understanding of this is not just names, but it's concepts, natures, realities, and properties of things. So here's the argument. And by the way, this argument has been taken from my friend and my teacher, Dr. Safruk.
Just before we go on to this argument, I think I would like to ask, why should exegetical understanding take precedence over what the literalist understanding is? Kali, you might know better than I do, probably. Kali or Mahadin, probably.
I mean, I in fact would raise the same point.
I have read those ayat, but I couldn't get the head and tail. I mean, what he's saying. I mean, those are simplistic verses, pretty much, right? They don't seem to be exuding the same kind of inference that Hamza wants to make here, right? But I think, I mean, I don't want to go into a different direction here, so maybe we can skip it.
Yeah, I mean, I just say that, you were very right in pointing this out. You see, they include or they refer to exegesis or exegetes whenever it's convenient for them. So the Quranic statement were not enough to present the argument, because the Quran in these verses is just telling a story about Adam, and what was mentioned was that Allah, just to prove to angels that he knows that this creation that I've just made knows more than you, told him some names of the things, right? And that way he was able to prove to angels that he knows more than you. That was the entire story that was being told in these verses. You don't need to read between the lines to extract an argument for the existence of God from this story. It's quite ridiculous, because if this is the way that you're going to proceed, then in every story you can just try to read too much between the lines and just looking for a certain argument. You can just draw an argument which is actually an argument from your own mind, and you're actually sort of shoving it into the Quran and trying to then extract it back out. It isn't there. So again, there is they only go into tafsir, and they're very ready and very willing to go into tafsir whenever it's convenient for them. But whenever we point out that, this is the way that these verses have been explained by the earliest and the oldest scholars, they are like, no.
They
If
back out.
if it's problematic, they'll not take a moment to just throw that scholar's tafsir, aside, and just say that no, this is not what the Quran says. Read what the Quran is saying. No, it
Right,
doesn't
right.
matter what
And
what that particular
our
exegete
fundamental,
has explained.
yeah,
So yeah.
They, at that point they resort to, oh no, our fundamental source of information is just the Quran. We don't want to go into that, because if it contradicts, and no matter how you try to convince them that this is what it is, the earlier scholars understood those things. So yeah, it's a matter of convenience pretty much. Anyway, yeah, we won't delve too deeply into this, but we'll move on, right?
Chowdhury, he's a well-known academic, and he actually published a paper on this particular topic. So here are the premises. Number one, prior cognitive information is necessary for humans to formulate judgments about things. Number two, the ultimate source of prior cognitive information is either from a human, a non-human, animal, an inanimate object, natural selection, chance, or a non-natural source. Number three, the ultimate source of prior cognitive information cannot be from a human, a non-human animal, an inanimate object, natural selection, or chance. Four, which is the conclusion, it must be from a natural source. And we have two more conclusions. Five, the most plausible non-natural source for prior cognitive information must be a transcendent agent cause that has the property of omniscience, life, and intelligence. And it finally follows conclusion 6, the non-natural agent cause in 5 that we just mentioned makes sense of the God of Islamic theism. Now here's some preliminary points. The argument that I'm producing today is not claiming that necessarily at every historical stage of human development that it required some kind of supernatural pedagogical agent. I'm saying that the original human required that prior cognitive input. And this is very important. It's like a causal argument, a first causal argument from a prior cognitive input perspective. Also, the premises that I have unpacked, they're not kind of something that naturalists would necessarily disagree with, because we even have in the empiricist and nativist debate a discussion of kind of an innate cognitive apparatus with some kind of linguistic cognitive biases. Now, even the empiricists agree that you do require some nativism, but they're not as extreme, if you like, as the nativists themselves. Also, and just to repeat, we're talking about the initial human being requiring that pedagogical source that gave the prior cognitive information that is required for us to have judgments and thoughts. So let's go back to premise 1 to unpack. Prior cognitive information is necessary for human beings to formulate judgments about things. Now, the capacity to think, the capacity to have thoughts and to have rational judgments or unsound and sound judgments, you require at least 4 conditions. A reality external to the agent, or a perceived reality. Number 2, sense faculties that sense the reality. Number 3, a properly functioning brain that differentiates the sense reality. And 4, prior cognitive information. If any of these conditions are absent, you cannot have thought, you cannot have judgment. And also, you have to have prior cognitive information in some sense to be able to link that prior cognitive information to that sense reality in order to have a thought and a judgment. Without that, all you're going to have is sensation and sensation and sensation. You're not going to have thought or any form of judgment and adequate cognition. And we can unpack that in the Q&A. Premise number 2, the ultimate source of prior cognitive information is either from a human, non-human animal, inanimate object, chance, natural selection, or a non-natural source. So let's go to human beings. Well, the prior cognitive information that is necessary for thinking could not have come ultimately from another human being. Why? Because we could ask, where did that human being get that prior cognitive information from? And to continue that chain, you have an absurdity of an infinite regress. Non-human animals. Well, we'll be hard-pressed to give examples of an intelligent account of how a non-human animal species could have meaningfully interacted with human beings based on some pedagogical setup or approach. It might exist in the future with some postmodern secular ethics. We'll be marrying animals soon. That's what happens when you change your ethics based on your own desires and your false understanding of suffering. But the point is, we don't have that set up at the moment, and God forbid it happens in the future. And if it were true that some kind of animal gave us that prior cognitive information or input, well, at the end of the day, it goes back to the regress problem. Where did that animal get that prior cognitive information from? And we know that the infinite regress is absurd, therefore this is not an adequate explanation. What about inanimate objects? Well, inanimate objects do not have cognitive abilities or functions or the ability to teach, instruct, or pass on cognitive information. Just like under naturalism, you can't adequately explain language development. You can't adequately explain the fact that we have inner subjective conscious experiences, because fundamentally under this physicalist reality, it's just blind, cold, non-intentional processes. And at the end of the day, when you have blind, cold, non-intentional processes, you have to now start to explain how we could develop language, how we could develop cognition, how we could develop inner subjective conscious experience. And that is going to be interesting debate. So inanimate objects fail. What about 4, chance? Well, let's cite Dr. Safruk Chowdhury, because he actually gives a beautiful undercutting defeater to this possibility. He says, the major problem with this possibility is that it's not remotely clear how chance can do anything. Chance is not metaphysically a thing, an entity. It has no being and is not a cognizing potency or power. It is a term that is inadvertently endowed with a creative power and efficacy. In fact, for chance to be a candidate for inputting prior cognitive information would be to granted an all-pervasive power reserved only for something that we would describe as living. To do this, however, is to commit the fallacy of verification, which consists of attributing concrete characteristics to something non-concrete or abstract. By arguing that chance did X, created Y, and selected Z, obscures something deeply taking place, and that is making chance a cause when it is mere mathematical possibilities in abstracto. In effect, to attribute chance as a cause for originating prior cognitive information is tantamount to saying nothing originated prior cognitive information. What about natural selection? Well, this fails because there is no necessary link between survival, reproduction, and the ability to even have thoughts and sound or unsound judgments. Look at cockroaches. They survive, they reproduce, but they're not here talking about the inner dimensions of spirituality or theism and atheism or debating about moral theory. Cockroaches are just cockroaches, and unfortunately we do have the human cockroaches in the world that cause a lot of suffering, and unfortunately many of them have been naturalists and secularists. But nevertheless, and one would also argue that there is no necessary link between survival and reproduction even having true reliable cognitive faculties. For example, if I'm the first human, or I'm part of the evolutionary chain, I'm one of your ancestors that walk into a jungle and I have the false belief based on the unreliable cognitive faculties that mushrooms are poisonous, I'm going to survive. But is it true that all mushrooms are poisonous? Of course not. Now, the atheists may retort and say, what about evolutionary reliabilism? This is the view that it's more likely for natural selection to select traits that formed cognitive faculties that were reliable and produced true beliefs over unreliable cognitive faculties that produce false beliefs. However, I will reply by saying, where's your evidence? Why the epistemic privilege? Why? And when you look at the empirical evidence, with all due respect, you have to be radical skeptics, and therefore there is no truth. They claim there is no God. They claim that there is evil. You have to be radical you have to be radical skeptical about these categories. In actual fact, you have to turn into a postmodernist. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because when you look at the works of James Sage and many others, and you look at cognitive science today, they're saying that having true empirical perceptions is not conducive to survival and production. So we have to have false perceptions or not totally accurate perceptions. Also, the very fact that you think that you have to have true beliefs that are reliable, and we were developed that way, and selective forces selected those traits is completely incoherent. Why? Because of the fact that when you use your brain to a certain degree, it drains your resources to make specific inferences and deductions, drains your biological resources. In actual fact, it's more conducive to survival and reproduction to do what? To make false generalizations that would facilitate survival and reproduction. We could cite James Sage much later.
It can be hard designing complex systems if you don't have prior experience as a software developer.
So, conclusion number 4. Therefore, it must be from something.
How long of his speech is left?
Yeah, I think probably another minute or two, I think, maybe.
And then it ends, yeah? All right, let's
Yeah,
When philo-
it's been a long-winded argument, pretty much, right? So he
yeah, yeah.
is
As in his entire this entire session ends. His opening statement finishes in 1 minute. Is that correct?
no, probably I think 2-3 more minutes. I'm not quite sure. Kylie, you might have idea. I don't know.
Only reason I'm saying that is because I think we did plan for this stream to be shorter. We've got about 10 minutes left. So what do you want to do? Do you want to pick up later on and continue the rest and just finish off now from what he said?
So do you want to deal with this argument right now, or you
Yeah,
want to?
yeah.
You're saying deal with it later?
No. We'll deal with as much as he said so far. But I'm saying, do you want to finish his opening statement? I don't think we're gonna have time to finish his opening statement. And others.
I don't know what's left here. I think let's finish this argument, right? Has he done with all the premises and conclusions so far?
He's not.
He hasn't, right?
Yeah.
So shall we finish those? Then we'll.
Right? Okay, finish this argument. But if he's got more to say after that, I think we'll pause it and continue next time.
All right.
Yeah.
Non-natural, since all the possible naturalistic explanations to explain prior cognitive information fail, the reasonable conclusion is that to explain prior cognitive information is to cite a non-naturalistic explanation. And the non-naturalistic explanation, and this is the conclusion 5 and 6, is that it has to be a non-natural transcendent agent that has the property of omniscience, life, and intelligence. Why must it be living? Because an inanimate object does not contain prior cognitive information, and it doesn't have the ability to instruct the prior cognitive information. And a living being is a rational precondition for possessing any pedagogical attributes. As Allah says, Allah.
All right, this is a good point, right? To stop?
Okay, yeah.
All right. So a lot has been said here. He put his argument as a, So who wants to go first?
Clearly, Hamza's what he's doing is talking from the philosophy of mind, right? And he's taking one particular philosopher's view, and that's his particular argument.
And it's the prior cognitive information is necessary.
Sorry?
He has given like 5, I think 4 premises, and then he has conclusion in 5 and 6, pretty much, right?
Yeah, what we'll have to do for this is probably have a write-up. Maybe I will after the stream in the next week or so. As you know, sometimes I write things up. I'll write a more specific responses. But in general, in respect to these particular types of arguments, they're not necessarily seen as any with any sort of glorification or appreciation or acknowledgement outside of the philosophy community. In other words, these are not cognitive scientists, they're philosophers of mind. And philosophers of mind think of lots of bizarre, eccentric, weird, idiosyncratic things. Some things, sometimes they don't just map up to the real world. It's a bit like Alvin Plantinga's argument, right? And in fact, it's an adaptation of Alvin Plantinga's argument that through evolutionary natural processes, or by other means, you can't simply get cognitive states that will produce true and accurate perceptions. And me and Philo, we've talked about this at length, how it leads to, if we bite the bullet and go down that route, that naturalism can't produce true and accurate beliefs, then it does lead to circular problems, because in order to actually get to that conclusion, you need to start off with true and accurate beliefs, right? And there is an issue with circularity there. And I do think Hamza's argument is going to also start off with circularity, that indeed, if he wants to force the naturalist to go to the conclusion that there has to be some sort of being or God or something like that, they have to deal with problems of self-reflexivity as well, which is the idea that you're using those senses to make that judgment, to think that there is a God. In other words, there's issues with so if the problem is that you can't have a cognitive state that can come to true and accurate beliefs, true and accurate perceptions, because if you evolve, then you can't have the cognitive capabilities to do that, to distinguish between truth and falsehood. Well, and therefore, on naturalism, you can't have those sort of you can't justify the truth of naturalism, right? If that's the case, then you can't also justify the truth of Alvin Plantinga's argument, because you can't have true and accurate perceptions. It leads to very similar circularity problems as did Descartes' argument. That Descartes tried to demonstrate the truth of his senses, and what did he use to demonstrate the truth of his senses was his senses. But trying to use your senses to prove your senses leads to self-reflexivity. You know, you need something outside of your senses to prove the truth of your senses. But you can't have something outside of your senses to prove the truth of your senses, because you have to use your senses to prove the truth of your senses. So you end up circular situations. So it came to the conclusion that you can never prove the truth of your senses. The same issue here is the case here. On if you do need to demonstrate the truth of anything Hamza is saying, you need accurate sensory perceptions. But according to Hamza, you can't have accurate sensory perceptions, but then you can't demonstrate the truth of what Hamza is saying. So it leads to circularity problems, in which case we need to put it aside. Anything in philosophy that leads to these sort of circularity problems, we just don't know what we're doing, right? And situations like that, too mind-numbing and too difficult to fix. And this is not a problem just for evolutionists or materialists or naturalists. It's a problem also for Hamza. The Descartes' problem of senses, for example, external world problem, is also something that the theist has to grapple with. And furthermore, on Hamza's model of the world, he has skeptical theism. And under skeptical theism, lots of people have made the argument, lots of philosophers of religion also has acknowledged, that there's an issue that if God can have mysterious reasons for things, and we can never judge God's actions from the limited that we've seen, we can never also confirm that God is good. And if we can't confirm that God is good and God has mysterious reasons, he might have deceptive reasons. Yeah, and therefore he has the same issue on evolution. For example, we may not be able to have true senses because we can never justify the truth of our senses or using our senses, because evolution may not have configured us that way. But on theism, they can also not have the true sense. They may not also have true senses, because to say that you have true senses suggests that you have solved skeptical theism, because if God can have mysterious reasons, then you can never know what those mysterious reasons are. He may have a mysterious reason to deceive you, and in fact, on Islamic theism, God is a deceiver, right?
Right.
So there's some issues there as well. So all of these same problems, I call these epistemic problems of knowledge, of deep actual knowledge. And whenever you get into circular issues, we can't say anything either way. And these circular issues are not exclusively the problem that bludgeons the naturalist; it also bludgeons the theist. And this is why Alvin Plantinga's argument of, what was it called again? The naturalistic arguments against atheism, right, or something like that. Against evolutionary arguments against naturalism, and this is an adapted version of that. This version, sorry, I'm talking over his version, a little bit of it has all the hallmarks of that, but it is the argument that we have innate beliefs, and because we have innate beliefs, it couldn't come out of nowhere. Evolution can't do it. Some of the premises were involving Alvin Plantinga's argument that evolution can't produce true beliefs. Not a lot of people in the intellectual community.
Madan, we lost your voice, I think.
Yes, I cannot hear me. I hear him.
Right. Madan, can you hear us? Okay.
I can hear you.
You probably 10 seconds we lost you.
Yes,
10 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the problem with what Hamza is saying, and there's so much to unpack. I really can't explain everything unless I write it up in a paper. Anybody who wants to get a quick review, I think Richard Carrier actually made a good argument explaining some of the problems with Alvin Plantinga's issue. It's not true that cognitive scientists think evolution can't produce true beliefs or accurate states of mind or sensory data, etc., in a proper way or anything like that. In fact, there are simulations done on computer models and so on that demonstrates that in the right sort of conditions, you can have that, right? So there is that issue that it's not all cognitive scientists who are thinking stuff like that. Indeed, there might be some, as an evolved mind, you're going to have some filters, just like a computer operating system has. It filters the MS-DOS, it filters the background data into a nice, appealing, beautiful user interface. And that's what our consciousness might be like. But there's not enough information to suggest that our entire reality is a hallucination or delusion. Cognitive scientists are still working on that. And Hamza Tzortzis' argument is not using the entirety or a representative sample of cognitive scientists. They're not coming around and unanimously saying, look, everything that we know about science, facts, information, nature, psychology, everything that we know about physics is all wrong, simply because everything, our minds are evolved in a particular way that leads to falsehood. Nobody's saying that. I would challenge Hamza to show me that cognitive scientists are in consensus with that. They're not, right? Some cognitive scientists are proposing like a hypothesis or a theory, a workable theory, showing that, look, there's some interesting issues, some puzzling issues, problems here, that because we evolved, it could be the case that our senses don't correspond to an actual reality. The extent of that problem is challengeable. The extent of how it creates these distorted senses, to the extent of the distortion, whether it's complete distortion with a slightly distorting, it's disputed so far. It's still it's a work in process. And Hamza is standing on the shoulders of like a single or a few cognitive scientists and making a huge proclamation that is not representative of the community. There's more things I can say about this. And he says that, you know, on natural selection, you can't get, because cockroaches. That's it. That is probably one of the most serious points. His point, you know, the idea that since cockroach, you can say that about any trait. You can say that about legs. Right. Cockroaches don't have legs, so you don't need to have legs.
No, but that is demonstrably false, because cockroaches have minds and they have cognitive abilities, right? That's why they have survived. Now, the one very strong objection and very serious flaw in his argumentation is he's assuming that the cockroaches have survived, but they don't need any cognitive abilities. They have cognitive abilities, definitely, and they have the cognitive abilities to survive in the niche that they survive in, basically, right? So every living being that has a niche to survive, they don't have to have a full-blown human capable, cognitive abilities to survive. Pretty much, right?
He's trying to say that they don't have the same magnitude of abilities as human beings. But
right, and every living being has a very different kind of. And if you go back to at least if you trust a little part of our evolution, at least, because he talked about Adam, and so we can assume that he maybe believes in some form of evolution from Adam, maybe not. But if you go far back, you'll see that our cognitive abilities were lower and lower and lower and lower. So they have been evolving because of the niche that we have established ourselves in, pretty much.
No, his point is silly. His point is like saying, since I said legs by accident, but I do know cockroaches do have legs. I was thinking about a full-blown human anatomical leg in my mind, but that's wrong. It's like saying cockroaches don't fly like birds. Although cockroaches do have wings in some sense, some of them anyway. Since cockroaches don't fly like birds or have feathers, therefore there's no evolutionary need for feathers, right?
Right. I mean, this would apply to anything, any unique characteristic or organ or any specification that any species has. You could argue that since this species has this and this doesn't, this means that this is not a necessary requirement for this species to survive. It's a ridiculous argument. I'm not sure why he didn't think it through. Why would he put it that way?
His deeper point might be the idea that, and this is a philosophical point, he's trying to say there's no connection between evolution, brain size, natural selection, and survival, or something like that. Or there's no, in order to survive, sorry, let me just rephrase that. Ignore the last 20 seconds. In order to survive, in order to go through natural selection and develop a organism that can survive, you don't need to have a thinking capacity. You don't need to have the thinking capacity. And that is not completely untrue, but it's not true either, because it's true that in certain niches, like we've already said, in certain niches, in certain environments, we can get away with lower states of cognitive capabilities. Just like in certain niches, you can get away with smaller bodies, with less limbs, and so on. But in other niches, you might develop different abilities depending on the evolutionary pressures, and we know that. So just because you don't need to survive, there's no necessary link between survival and truth, right? doesn't, or true perceptions, does not mean there isn't a evolution, that there wasn't within human evolution, and precisely, and the other animals and the other species that were related to us, there weren't any evolutionary pressures that linked those two things together, in order to generate the certain advantages, human species advantages that we had, right? That brain size and cognitive abilities of our magnitude was eventually necessary because of the pressures, the survival pressures. So he misses the point there. So although in principle it is the case that you can have survival with lesser cognitive abilities, you can have survival without wings, right? You can have survival for certain species, but in particular evolutionary histories and lineages, wings were almost necessary, maybe, or through accident. They had evolved through accident, or it was necessary. We don't know enough to call it necessary or an accident, but it was probably the case that you needed to evolve those abilities. But yes, you can find other non-winged species elsewhere that didn't need that. So yeah, pretty much misunderstanding this situation.
Right. I mean, if I use a simple example or an analogy, let's say I have two options to survive. In order to survive, I need to either eat an apple or a banana. Now, it doesn't mean that if according to Hamza's argument, I don't necessarily need apples to survive. Yes, because I have another option to choose banana, but I have to choose at least one, right? Now, he's inferring from that since I have an option, that means that there is no way for me to actually choose this. That is not the case. There was an option for me to choose, either to choose an apple or a banana. I chose banana, but it wasn't a necessary option, but I had to choose one. I chose one of them, and at least choosing one of them was important and was necessary. And I don't know how. And his argument is that no, since it wasn't necessary to go down this certain path, it means that there can be no link between for me to, and there is no way for me to choose this path. How does that make sense?
Yeah. Sure.
I think that's one of the problems here.
And it might. The thing is, the issue is it might be necessary. It might have been necessary, right?
No,
absolutely. It might have been necessary, as you said, in that particular niche and that particular micro environment in which that species is living. Let's say a certain species is living on an island in which there is a certain specific environment, and there is a certain competition within which that species is living in, right? So it automatically has to choose a certain niche to survive in. And that is what we see in evolution and in the entire animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. We see different animals and plants fitting into certain and specific niches, and that is what happens. So in a way, it was necessary for them. We could argue that as well. So the entire argument that Hamza is giving, particularly in this statement, doesn't make sense at all.
But also,
one more thing.
And also,
I'll add. So sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
So, in fact, no, you guys go, because I'm going to maybe expand on another point that Hamza mentioned.
No, I just wanted to mention one more point, that it is not necessary that the trait be the primary trait for survival. It could be a secondary or tertiary trait for generations to come, and then it may show up back again as one of the primary traits for survival, right? So, cognitive ability to recognize the truth value is, in this case, probably may not have served as well as in initial or earlier times of survival, probably. And at that time, those branches that happened through them is still held on to those traits, which showed up later on in different species of organisms. And then in those niches, they thrive, basically, because of those specific natural pressures, pretty much. So, there's no, there could be a correlation and there could be a weak link. There doesn't have to be a very strong link, is what I'm trying to say.
The thing is, there's so much evidence that our brains and cognitive abilities and innate tendencies and instincts are the product of evolution versus God, right? Because when you look through evolution and evolutionary psychology, they map right? Most of our instincts, feelings, desires, and so on are better understood through the lens of evolution than it is through the lens of theism, right? Therefore, it has to be a form of theistic evolution, if anything. That would help explain it. But what it shows is that because it can be understood within the lens of evolution, that is completely perfectly in line with evolution to have these cognitive abilities, and therefore the theistic part of theistic evolution is superfluous, right? Because look at our brain development. Our brain development has occurred in a particular way that is evidenced through fossils, cranium sizes, and so on. Look at our the way it's developed. The structure and the build-up from the lizard brain at the bottom, the baser instincts, the frontal cortex, again consistent with evolution, right? Look at the fact that our certain instincts that we have are more in line with procreation, right? Like when we want to, for example, judge somebody for their sexual as a sexual partner, and so on and so forth. That is explained through evolution much better than any theistic model, right? That we find let's say a female's hip to waist ratio, a man being tall or masculine. Yeah, those are almost predicted through an evolutionary lens, and not really predicted on a theistic lens, right? Because theism didn't have to use those resources, whereas evolution had to, right? And there are many other like stuff like cognitive biases. Why do we have cognitive biases? Well, a lot of those cognitive biases can be explained. If there's about 150 biases that we have in our brains, right? These are imperfections of the brain. And so Hamza's there talking about innate thinking tools or innate instincts and so on. Those are innate instincts, and some of them come from our evolutionary past. Yeah, if you read through evolutionary psychology of some of the cognitive biases that we have, it can only be explained through an evolutionary framework, right? Like confirmation bias, stuff like that. There's 150 of them, so you might want to read through them. Many of those are vestiges of our evolutionary history. And because let's just give you one. This is not a cognitive bias per se, but it's more of an instinct. I'll give you one example of instinct. Our tendency to like fatty foods and sugar. Now that's an innate instinct as well. It's an innate ability. We are born with it, you can say. It's therefore an innate idea. Just like everything Hamza is saying, it's not necessarily empirically learned, right? Wherever there is, I mean, obviously we have to empirically find the sugar, but the fact that we have an affinity towards that taste, yeah, is explained through evolution. Is because hunter-gatherers were in a more sugar-scarce environment, and therefore evolution evolved a appetite for hunting for sugar. And now, because we have outwitted evolutionary time, we sped up the time. It's called the mismatch hypothesis, the mismatch theory, in the sense that the technology has enabled us to change society so fast that evolution has not caught up.
Exactly.
So our bodies, our instincts are stuck in the savannah, yeah, thirsty and hungry for sugar. But what does that? But we have an abundance of sugar now because of the technological progress. Yet there's a mismatch because of this. People are suffering from obesity. So we have this tendency for chocolate that we don't need. That is not really explained by theism. Theism makes no predictions about this. Yet this innate tendency, evolution makes that prediction and gets it right. And I can throw about 150 of these biases and get it right. So what does the evidence support? That these innate tendencies that Hamza's talking about actually has a link to evolution. Therefore, what he's talking about is utter nonsense. Yeah.
Agreed. I was going to add something, but then I thought let's try to finish this up. All right. Kyle, you had something you wanted to add.
I think, what do you plan, Madan? How would you said that you're going to provide a bit more detail and written response. Do you think you're going to sort of formally write it down and then you can send probably an audio message and we can add it as a part of this video?
Yeah, maybe I can do that.
Or do you think?
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Mahadan. Do you think you can write as a slide or something like that? Maybe that'll then we can
I don't
just
think it would
put it
be
up.
too long, I think. But let's say, I mean, let's do this in as Mahadan said, because he would be able to provide a bit more detailed response to each and every point that Hamza mentioned, probably, or at least the
Right. No,
necessary
I'm asking
points.
just as a Mahadan does it, but just as a whatever PPT or something like that, or because we won't probably be able to edit this, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, we'll have to do another stream, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, then I guess we can decide about that.
We
But
can decide about it.
yeah, but I think we have covered the gist of it, probably. Maybe there are some points, the tertiary points that are not being addressed, but we are going to do this. As Mahadan said, he's going to
Yeah.
write down a detailed response to this, and
Hmm.
we'll think of a way to include this in the video, or let somehow convey this to our audience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Millions and millions and millions of
Or
things I can say about this. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of time, really, and it'll go into a lot of length.
right, right. Mahadan, so we'll end it over here, right? And
Yeah.
any further? Do you think we have time for maybe a call or two? Maybe make the link public. Wait for 5 minutes, or you want to close it?
We can do 5 minutes. If somebody wants to come on for 5 minutes, we can. So if anybody wants to come on right now, anybody who's watching wants to talk to us, wants to ask me a question, wants to challenge us, wants to pick our brains for anything, come along. We'd like to hear you. One question per person, maybe 5-10 minutes, and we'll be done. And whilst I'm talking about this, I just want to mention another thing that Hamza mentioned there. He did mix up a few different jabs at the idea that many of them were naturalists, not many cockroaches who killers were naturalists or something like that. I thought that was a little bit of, look, these guys are just play dirty, obviously. But he's also kind of wrong, right? I talked about Steven Pinker, and he said some of the worst most
Atrocities were,
committed in the last 100 years. This is, by the way, factually wrong, right? Per capita, they've done a comparison. Steven Pinker has gathered different statistics from different disciplines and has shown that some of the crimes of the 20th century, in terms of population level, relative to population levels, in terms of war deaths, in terms of civilian deaths, belligerent deaths, like combatant deaths, non-combatant deaths, the amount of people who were killed is a smaller fraction of the population than it was historically, even though we have weapons of mass destruction, far-reaching weapons, and we have more capacity for destruction. And in fact, the world has been getting more peaceful and more peaceful after the 1950s. And this is I don't know why these guys say such things that are not just wrong, but humongously wrong. That it doesn't. Have they even heard of Steven Pinker? That's my thing right now. That there's so much data showing that the world has been towards an upward trajectory across almost every dimension of human happiness, every dimension of human measurement of human success, education, hospitality, health, lifespan, medicine, things regarding wars, crime, safety, women's rights,
space
animal
travel, whatnot,
rights,
gathering resources, and all those things. Yeah, too many to mention.
worker rights, employment rights. Yeah, the
Right.
number of wars that are triggered, it's just been going downhill. Yeah, as in
Yes.
downhill, or wars have gone downhill, and all of those things are getting better and better. We're improving. We're living a much safer time. We eat like kings today when we act like beggars before. Well, the richest person probably act like some of the poorest people in society today. Right,
Martin, just to mention what you said, or just to support what you said. See, the olden times, what was the main thing of earning? How were you earning? Say, the Bedouin tribes of Arabia, how were they surviving? They didn't have enough resources for food. How would they survive? They were conquering nearby tribes, killing them, and then conquering the other tribes, surviving, looting their stuff and all that. This is not happening anymore, right? Pretty much, of course, right? You have enough resources for food. I mean, there is still hunger in the world, but that is due to problems in distributions and all those things. But so what you said is pretty true, that things have improved more and more. And then if you just count per capita, killings, probably that's though old times are going to trump what happened in the 20th century, or probably,
Historically, as Stephen Pinker shows, that around the world, 15% of the population in places would suffer the consequences of war. They would be directly impacted by it as war casualties. Now it's less than 1%, less than 0.5%, right?
Right. I mean, that's a significant drop, right? Almost like.
And maybe that's not the best measurement. Doesn't matter what sort of measurement tool that you use, you end up showing that it's been much better in the last 100 years than it has been historically. So what are they talking about? They may make the argument that it could be because they were, it could be because the population is much larger, the wars are happening in particular locations, and so on. And so
and
on.
One more problem here. Sorry, Mohammed, go ahead, please.
Even if you take into account that the populations are large to the extent that some people are just beyond the war area, even if you zoom into the war impacted area, there's far less civilian deaths, far less competent deaths. And there's more rights and protections, and more people are. There is a lot more humanitarian ethic in a war in the last 100 years, even despite the aggressive types of wars that have happened than in the past.
Right. I mean, one of the problems here in comparing these two eras is I don't even think that comparing these two eras is fair, because this is the era that we are talking about is the era of information. We have pretty much all the information about all the wars pretty much that have happened, all the atrocities and all those things, right? So we have a very significant amount of data, almost pretty much to the T, pretty much, right? But for the gone by ages that he's talking about, we have pretty much no data. I mean, we have we don't have any information about what those stories were written by the victors pretty much. So we don't have any information from the side of
Hamza, to be fair to Hamza, he's not saying that. He has not said anything here that Islamic past was better about this.
No, I'm talking about history as in through and through, not just Islamic history. I'm talking about all through. This was a problem everywhere, pretty much, whether it was a Christendom or the Aztecs or whoever, right? Or the Indians of Americas and all those, or the Aborigines of Australia. I mean, who knows how many were killed here, and especially the civilization was based in pretty much throughout Asia and Europe by and large, but we have no account of how many were killed in bygone eras.
Philo, I also need to go now as well. I think
right,
because he's got some duties to perform. So
Callie has left.
Yeah. So
shall we? Okay.
Shall we? We'll close the stream now. Yeah, we'll continue from here next time.
All right. Just before leaving you, I'll just want everybody to like and subscribe, share, comment below the stream once it is done, and press the notification bell and do whatever you can to spread the word. Pretty much spread the channel as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And Philo, that was supposed to be my part, but anyway.
Yes, because you wanted to close the stream, so I wasn't too sure whether you're gonna say this or not. So no. I took the mental too.
You have to let your children free and make their own decisions. You know that. I know fathers have a hard time letting the children's hand go.
Yeah, I just didn't want to miss this part. Basically, this.
You're like you should lead the stream, but then you just do everything for me at the end.
Okay, so now I won't remind you, because now you know, right? So
I know. So anyway, everybody out there, if you wanna like and subscribe, if you like our stream, like our stream, please, and subscribe. And I do wish that you guys can bring your colleagues, friends, anybody else who's interested, spread the word. We're not getting too many viewers. It's been many months now that we're on it, and for some reason we're not. Let us know why you think that is. Why do you think that is? Right? To those who are watching, what would make you watch this more? To those who have clicked, what is making you click away? Right? Are we going over your head? Are we too boring? Are we just not worth our salt? What's going on? Do you just not like the length? Let us know. Write a comment.
क्या आपको हिंदी में सुनना है स्ट्रीम, हिंदी या उर्दू में सुनना है? अगर वैसा भी है तो आप एटलीस्ट बताएं, राइट? कि हिंदी उर्दू में अगर चाहिए स्ट्रीम तो हम शायद एक्स्ट्रा एफर्ट्स करके हिंदी या उर्दू में स्ट्रीम्स करें बेसिकली, क्योंकि अगर इसी तरह से चलता रहा तो शायद हम भी डिमोटिवेट हो जाएंगे, राइट, कुछ ना कुछ टाइम। और आई थिंक अगर आप लोगों की राय नहीं मिलेगी तो हमें मालूम भी नहीं चलेगा कि क्या गलत हो रहा है एग्जैक्टली, राइट मादिन?
Yeah, so yeah, I've said it all. So other than that, I wish you all a good night, and we will be touching base again in the near future to address rest of this. And in between, before we get to the review, we might do some streams on other stuff. Watch out for certain videos, small videos that we might do as well. Other than that, everybody stay well, and we're gonna go now. So good night, everybody. Bye bye.